recording. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Ballz in Your Face Marketing. I'm here with a very interesting and cool looking dude. Look at those shades with his alien cap on. Zack Scriven from Zack Scriven Media. This young man is keeping it real. Zach, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing amazing, dude. I gotta say, I love the name of the show. It brings me back to my childhood, back in the days working in the garage with my dad, 93.1 Jack FM, playing AC/DC, oldie hits. It's kind of a memory for me, So
the song pulls in a lot of people. It's pretty funny. I was about to say, like, oh, what, you got childhood memories of balls in your face? What's going on there? that was going to be a whole line of questioning right there. But okay, now the AC/DC, yeah, I hear you. So, we were talking a little bit about this before we got started, but tell me a little bit about Zack Scriven Media, what you're doing, how you came to that, what's the goal of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So, I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go. The short story is 4 months ago, I was an engineer and I quit one day, and the next day I just started making, I had been making LinkedIn videos and YouTube, but I really just started pursuing that full time and actually trying to make a living off of it. And the way that I achieved that was primarily through a combination of digital marketing and influencer marketing, where I'm the influencer. Kind of a little bit of inspiration from Quentin and kind of what he's doing with the Misfits. And I take inspiration from a lot of LinkedIn creators. And so I do digital marketing for some companies, and I go to conferences, I vlog, I do my podcast, and just in general, just try to have fun and inspire people with things that I'm passionate about, and really just try to, build a life around, or build a business around the life that I want to live, which is travel, have fun, and be able to be there for my family during those important times, and just kind of have a flexible lifestyle.
Right. Lifestyle-based business. So here's something that I find kind of very interesting about you is I've spoken a lot about this sort of new economy of authenticity, for sure. On LinkedIn, we see a lot of that, about people being very sort of earnest, honest, exposing their vulnerabilities. My personal take on that, though, is that, you don't have, that doesn't mean that one has to tell everything about themselves. But you put yourself out there. Like, this is what, and, I'm curious about it. I don't know, to be honest, like, whether that's, is that wise? Is that not wise? I don't know. It may, I think it may prove very well for you. I think you'll find your niche. But I mean, you have, I was watching your one day challenge the other day. I mean, you're not hiding the fact that you smoke pot, that you're trying to kind of hold that. How's that going? How's the not smoking pot going for you?
It's good. I haven't smoked since last night. I was here on my desk, and this is kind of like a trigger zone for me. Because this is my garage. This is where it would go down. And I'm not gonna lie, I did have a little urge, but I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna just sneak a little hit in and not tell anyone, because then I'm not holding myself accountable, right? The issue was that, and I don't think I'm like, let me take it back. So, like, I'm not like a drug addict by any means. Never done heroin, never done crystal meth, and I never even done cocaine. Reason why is because I know I'd probably really like it, and so I have a certain sense of willpower, but for weed, it was kind of like that soft spot for me that it didn't really. I'm a high achieving person, so it's like, it's not really messing my life up that bad. It allows me to relax. It kind of helps me, helped my Asperger's syndrome symptoms, and also helped me, maybe escape a little bit. So I was like, let me just cut everything off, because when I would quit smoking, I would just drink more, and when I would not have any drink, I would like go to sugar. And I talked about that on the Mark Metry podcast, and it felt good. I'm like, maybe I just want to take this to the next level and actually just, maybe not forever, maybe just one day at a time, and then see what kind of self-awareness I can gain, what kind of growth I can go through. So it's funny, everyone really received it very well except for my mom. And she called me it's, it's funny. So, she called me, she's like, she texted me, she's like, you got to remove that video. And of course I didn't. And, the next day she texted me back. My thought was that she was scared of that, how it would make her look as a parent, her kid smoking and talking about that. Like, she basically, would think that she failed. It turned out that she was more concerned about me losing my clients. And I totally, obviously that thought crossed my mind, but my thought was like, man, if I'm going to lose clients because I'm honest with who the fuck I actually am, then what the fuck, like, and plus one of my primary clients, one of the first clients I got, one of their core values is authenticity and transparency. So what better, it's not like I'm putting this video out on their channel. It's just me. So
right.
Take it or leave it,
Yeah, I know. And I mean, that's the thing. Like I've got first of all, I mean, I'm in Canada. We're about to legalize it here in October. I have a sneaking suspicion that it does less damage than, let's say, alcohol, which is perfectly socially acceptable, so there's a big social stigma around it. But it was gutsy of you, I thought. Like, I was kind of impressed with that. I think you've also talked a lot about sort of, your faith, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely gutsy. And that was another big thing that I made a decision early on. It was actually before I even quit, that if I was going to do this, that, God would basically provide the bare essential needs for my family and for me. So from that perspective, I wasn't really even taking a risk, and that, for some way I would find a way to provide for my family, whether that was, doing some video content creation for my local church or whatever, or maybe eventually just figuring out that it wasn't for me and then getting another job. But, and so my thought process was that, like, if I build this audience, if I build my voice and I'm actually authentic to who I am and proclaim my faith, that God would give me the audience, whether that's 100 or 1,000 or however many, to actually resonate with. And it's been working, it's a lot of people, they do notice that on my profile. They're like, I like that. So, it's not just me. Like Jake Jordan's has a Bible verse, Joe Crenshaw. And so those are people that I connect with, and we kind of have that shared faith. So. Yeah.
No, man, I find it very interesting. I'd be very curious to see, where your career goes. And I mean, I certainly, again, I do believe in this economy of authenticity. I really do, like, exactly. Like, if somebody doesn't like that, they're like, Jesus, this guy's a pothead, and they don't want to do business with you, so be it. But for every, person that who doesn't like that, there might be somebody who's totally fine with it. Same thing in terms of, being sort of faith-based and driven it like that. So I almost see you as sort of an interesting case study in this sort of new economy. And I'll be very curious to see where that stuff goes for you. And by the way, probably a good, wise idea to stay away from the coke. And aside from the fact that it is highly addictive, I know that. But I stayed away from it mostly because I had, in a way, I guess I would say, I had the good fortune of knowing a lot of people who were doing it, and they just turned into assholes. Like, there's no drug that I know of that turns people into bigger assholes than cocaine. Like, it's just ugly. It makes you arrogant. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, that was like one thing where I saw that, I was just like, man, I do not want to be that. I do not want to do that.
I will say that I did get prescribed Adderall in college for ADHD. It's kind of like Asperger's, one of the common associated symptoms or misdiagnosis. I mean, I feel like I do have ADHD-like symptoms, so I was prescribed Adderall, and I took that for a while. I took it, and then it slowly starts going from taking it every day to getting a bigger prescription, and then taking it to study, and then I'm chopping it up and I'm selling it, and then I'm taking it at raves, and so I eventually slowly started abusing that, and so I had to remove myself from that because of that fact that I just started abusing it. I'm like, I realized, I'm like, hey, this is not good, and it's not healthy. So, like, when you stay up for 2 days, like, that's probably a good sign that you should. So,
that's been my take on that. Like, that's like, I'm not even, I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't have ADHD. You know, if it was like there was the odd kid and they were just like, they maybe at best were identified as hyperactive, and then nothing was done about it. They just pissed the teacher off a bit, you know, and that was that. Like I whatever, you know, I'm no doctor, I'm no scientist. I can't say whether that's a real thing or not. I have certain suspicions about that, to be honest. But this is so I didn't know that you were Asperger's. I mean, I've studied psychology. I've known a good number of Asperger's people. You don't strike me as Asperger's. I mean, it's got to be very low level.
Okay, so you know, I'm not diagnosed. I'm actually working on trying to get diagnosed to further just kind of work through. So, I mean, you know, we've known each other for like 5 minutes. So, yeah, I'd say it's probably a low level. It's definitely a low level. The biggest things for me are social environments, not being able to pick up on social cues, just in general, like feeling kind of socially awkward. And here's the thing.
Hold on.
You can learn
How old are you?
26.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, man, people feel socially awkward their whole lives. Go on.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, so, yeah, just, and then my obsessive interests, my narrow obsessive interests that always changes. And just when I start talking to someone, I'll keep really, really talking, and I won't really get that the conversation should end. And, there's some more, I have problems with executive functioning. So like scheduling is really hard for me. Organizing is really hard for me. You know, but I was really smart and high functioning, like in math and sciences, but just, yeah, so I am. So if you do know anyone, I'm thinking about maybe talking to, you know, a psychiatrist or a therapist, like maybe even online, and documenting that process, like of how I can, because there's not really a medicine that you could take for Asperger's, right? There's common things that are associated with it, like depression, which I don't really have, or anxiety. So you could take Prozac, but I'm not going to take that, you know. Nothing against that, but, and then there's the ADHD and the Adderall, which, you know, maybe I would try that again in a more responsible way. But, yeah, so I am working on just, you know, my friends would always call me savant. There's definitely something different about me, and I guess we're all different, right? So it's just like, do I have to put a label on it? I don't know. You know, I think some of the things too is, who would say those things that I say on LinkedIn too, right? Like, I don't understand always that there's a social construct, and I don't understand it always. And it's gotten me in trouble before. You know, I've been blocked a couple times on LinkedIn, and just from stuff that I don't get. And it sucks, because like, you know, in my heart, I'm just a normal person. And you know, at the end of the day, I love everyone. You know, I say that at the end of my LinkedIn videos, love you guys, love you, LinkedIn fam. And, but yeah.
Interesting. So when you say that, then it's sort of a self-diagnosis.
Yeah. Well, did I say my friends used to always call me savant in high school?
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, people used to call you a bit of a savant, but you know,
I know I wasn't like a Rain Man savant, but yeah, just different. Yeah. So I do want to get some more awareness on the situation, but your feedback is helpful. I think one of the things is you can learn to mimic social actions, but it's much more of a work progress rather than a natural progress for a neurotypical person.
Mm-hmm.
So with all I go to networking events, I go to LinkedIn locals. So I do operate in a social environment, but it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between, for sure, like feeling socially awkward or feeling like you're maybe not picking up on certain cues, and yeah, I mean, like a lot of people feel that way anyways. You know, like, I mean, I've described, and it's funny because I would almost come at it from the opposite end. You know, I consider myself almost hyper empathetic. So I pick up on a lot of cues, and in a way, that's why I often I've said this a lot, that I prefer the one-on-ones with people versus group settings, largely because in the group setting, I'm like picking up on social cues from conversations that are in the distance all around me, and it's almost like a lot of noise. So that's in a way like why, to a certain extent, like I'm not a huge, I mean, I can be fairly social, and I don't mind, you know, well, I mean, I'm getting to be an old man, so I don't go to parties and stuff like that anymore. I've got kids and that whole thing. But I mean, I used to love it. I used to be I am a very social person, but group settings I've always found kind of intense too, you know. But it's from the opposite side. I mean, is that what you are? Is that what you're saying? Do you feel as if you have a lack of empathy, that you're not picking up on things?
So this is very strange. This is something I'm actually starting to discover. So it's definitely hard for me to connect with emotions. Definitely hard to express those. And you know, I think that was one of the things that we'd actually kind of helped with too, is kind of being more introspective and not just being like, oh, you know, like I need to make LinkedIn videos. Like, let me make LinkedIn videos. Like, or last year was like my drone, my Mavic. Oh, you know, look at this drone. Like, look at how cool it is. I'm flying it every day. Like, just kind of take a step back and like think about feelings and how people feel. So where was I going with that? So, yeah, and empathy. So there was this really weird thing. So you remember the Thailand, when the boys got stuck in the cave in the Thailand thing?
Yeah.
This is really strange, and this is like something probably not many people would admit, but I had a hard time feeling empathy for them, and I couldn't understand why. And it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, why would I, like, how terrible, right? It's such a terrible situation. They were just hiking, but like in my mind, it's kind of dark, you know. It's kind of weird that I couldn't feel empathy. Like, you know, I didn't do anything bad or anything, but that was like my thought. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like, again, like I've got an undergrad in psychology. I'm no clinical psychologist. I can't really, I'm not qualified to tell you necessarily what that means, but there's also different levels of, I guess, empathy, right? Because there's what you're talking about, which is, you know, hearing a news story and being like, oh, that's terrible, and feeling bad for the person. And then there's the empathy at the level of picking up again on social cues, knowing when somebody is, you know, getting a sense, okay, they're getting, like you were mentioning earlier, you know, oh, they're getting tired of this conversation. I sense an angry tone. And are you saying that you feel like you don't pick up on those?
Not as easily.
Yeah.
Not as easily, yeah.
Interesting. And
it's hard too, because the more you research it, there's kind of like, you got to be concerned with confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I know from what my fiance tells me that it's hard to live with me, and that
at least you could get a fiance.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I guess that's true. Yeah, so she says that like she feels like second class to me. Like whatever my interest is, like it takes precedence over her, and that's not a good thing, right? So like I have a hard time finding balance, and you know, so like
I wonder whether it's more just a matter of, you know, being a very just linear, logical. Again, like obviously you were into engineering, so you know, like math and any of the sort of the sciences and being, you know, I mean, I generally feel this anyways in a way, right? Like, I mean, I think emotion, our emotional realities are important, you know, and in some ways, you know, that it ties, some ways that ties to the spiritual, but let me keep that separate. So we have emotional lives, there's no question, and people do, and it's a huge component of who we are. But what sometimes I definitely do feel, it's like we overemphasize that, right? Like in reality, right? Like, you know, logic takes up this and emotion, you know, takes up that, when really we should almost be turning that around, right? Like we should in many cases be able to remove our emotional reactions to a lot of circumstances and think about them in more rational, practical, linear terms. You'll 100%. end up with better results if you remove the emotion, you know, from elements. So it just might, I wonder whether it's just a personality type, you know, like I said, that you're just a linear thinker.
It's honest. I mean, it served me well in a lot of cases, you know, 26 and real estate investor, I have Roth IRA, you know, I dropped out of college, but that was because like I realized like why put off my earning potential when I could do the engineering work now. And so, but like to be able to completely remove all emotion is a good thing in certain scenarios, but then it comes with the downside that it's hard to then make decisions that do require emotions, like within interpersonal relationships or, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, you know, look, people are there's different, the world is made up of different personality types, and right? Like it would be boring if we were all the same. I'm not advocating, you know, us all going all completely Vulcan, but I'm just saying, you know, maybe a little more rational, linear, you know, and maybe in part I have a higher tolerance for this than maybe a lot of people, because I've worked in digital marketing, digital advertising. I've worked with a lot of programmers, and a lot of the cases, like, they're just very binary thinkers. They're, you know, it's like they don't, a lot of them have Asperger's way high. Like, you got a bit of mojo to you. Like, I don't meet a lot of Asperger's dudes with mojo. None. Zero. Not many Asperger's guys would get a girlfriend, let alone a fiance. That, you know, so you're probably, I could be wrong. My guess is that's probably an exaggeration. You're just more of a linear, logical, more binary minded, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay. I think you're right, man. I think if there was a label for me, it'd be Zack Scriven. And I think it's just kind of one of the things that I've kind of identified with most. But yeah, there are things that I don't have that, like a lot of people that have Asperger's, they mention like a super hypersensitivity to sound and environment. I'm not super like the sound, like I go to a large room, the sound doesn't really bother me, or like they have a hard time going to a concert. That doesn't bother me. I will say though that, I don't know, maybe all people say this, I do have a very hyper awareness when I'm driving. Like I can basically like not even like it's a second thing to me. I don't know if that's like everyone thinks that, but.
Well, I mean, again, I think that's consistent. Well, I mean, look, I think it's, you know, you, again, being an engineer, you probably have a very high spatial acuity, right?
Oh, so, yes.
Right. So
I love maps, and I love spatial geometry. I love big buildings. So like when I go to New York, I go to the top of the Empire State Building because I like seeing, like, it's so much different actually being there and mapping it out in my mind. It's very pleasing to me rather than just seeing it in movies or going on Google Maps, which is still fun, but it's nothing like actually being there and mapping it out. So that's why I love traveling. But yes, I'm very spatial. I have a good sense of direction. What about you, man? It kind of sounds like you kind of have a similar kind of more rational, logic based.
I'm actually, I would say I'm like right in the middle, and I'm a very sort of torn in both ways. I have there's no question that I know that I have a very high level actually of intuition, and almost in some ways, you know, a hypersensitivity to empathy. On one episode, I'll spare you the story, but I mean, was basically able to find kittens in a forest based on the body language of a cat, you know, like, when I was like 6. But I kind of like both worlds. Like, I think I'm very much in the middle of when they look at, like, you know, personality profiles and stuff like that, on a lot of those measures, whether it's, you know, extrovert, introvert, you know, emotional, linear, all those things, I tend to be somewhat in the middle. And in a way, it's almost like an internal battle all the time, you know. So for, you know, I mean, bringing it back to spirituality, that's a interesting one for me to talk about, because, like, well, first of all, I mean, so my mom was a devout Roman Catholic, and she raised us Catholic. My father was an atheist Jew. So, like, that's not exactly the most consistent theological upbringing, right? And it's just something that I've always been kind of fascinated.
What's an atheist Jew?
Somebody, in the Jewish faith, right, you can be Jewish without necessarily believing in God. You can be culturally Jewish.
Okay.
Right.
That makes sense.
Like basically, like under the Jewish religion, basically, as long as your mother was Jewish, you're Jewish. And if your father, like, that's the thing, like, because it comes for me, because it comes on my father's side, I'm not Jewish. And I had that reminds me of, like, I remember, like, working at this camp where I had, like, it was a high, large proportion of Jewish kids and Jewish staff. And I remember going through my lineage, because I'm very sort of mixed bag. And I was like, well, I'm 1/4 this, 1/8 this, etc. And somebody was just like, well, what side does the Jewish come? I'll tell you whether you're 1/8 Jewish or not. And I was just like, what are you going to tell me, that there's a void in my genealogical background? Like, but so yeah, basically, I mean, the fact that he's Jewish is really irrelevant to that whole discussion. He was an atheist. So I've got a very devout Roman Catholic mother with an atheist father, which basically made me agnostic. And I think that's the thing, is like, I have this, I'm not inclined to, I'm very wary of magical thinking, but I also do have, I would say, there's no question, like, I do have a sense of spirituality, and I think it's a very important aspect of the human experience. So I like I said, I'm just sort of, it's a good example of something where I'm kind of torn in between the two worlds.
Dude, I think it was interesting that you did bring up that your father was a agnostic or an atheist Jew, because I'm not gonna lie, that doesn't make it sound like much of a religion. It sounds like more of a cultural kind of club type thing. And
well, it could be both.
If you don't have to.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, at that point, it's not really religious. It is pure. You're right. That if that's where, if you're not showing up to shul, if you're not practicing it as a religion, then it's not really a religion. It's a culture. And it's one of the rare kind of, I would say it's definitely one of the rare religions or labels that goes on both of those lines. Yeah, like, I mean, exactly. Like, you will never hear, I never hear anybody say that they're an atheist Catholic or an atheist Muslim. I've never heard that. But there is, I guess, certain sort of cultural values, family values, etc., that come into that bucket of Judaism, that you can call yourself a Jew without necessarily believing in God. But that's for the Jews to sort out, I guess. Yeah,
I think so. Myself, I definitely struggled with that. Growing up, I was kind of raised quasi. I was baptized Catholic, I think, and my mom's family was Catholic, and we didn't really go to church all that much, but we did talk about God, we did pray before meals and stuff, and it's good towards the end of the high school years and early college years. Like, I pretty much, I think I went agnostic, atheist, kind of in that area, and then I had a couple of experiences. It's kind of supernatural experiences and stuff, and just things that didn't really make sense. And so, but then I still kind of went back to my ways and just still try to, like, maybe deny it. And right now I'm a Christian, so I think that kind of does help me connect with an empathy side. Like, I think humans ourselves, we're naturally, like, self-serving people. And so, like, we're really, like, if you just kind of go down that path, that's like where the logic and ration, like, takes you. Like, look at Mr. Elon Musk, for example. I think he's a good example of that. Like, he said in the podcast last night, like, Darwin's not going away. I think there's always going to be that war between, God versus no God, and whether that's Christian God or whoever's God. I personally believe in Jesus and the Christian faith, but yeah, it's very interesting. I'd say my life is better with my faith than without. It gives it more of a meaning and gives me more of a purpose, in addition to the things that I've seen. Like, for example, like just me meeting Mary and our daughter, like those were both like, I want to say like miracles. Like I felt God brought us together. When I met Mary, she's a flight attendant. I wasn't even supposed to be on that plane. I showed up to the DFW airport 37 minutes before the plane was due to take off. And so I go to the ticket counter and I check in, and, I didn't have a check bag. I just had a backpack. There was no security line. I would have obviously made the flight, but at 45 minutes before, if you haven't checked in, they'll sell your seat to someone else if the flight is oversold. And so I argued, and sure enough, there was no luck. So I ended up booking another flight. It was super expensive, like last minute. And that was the plane that I was on. But not only that, like I was in an aisle seat, and Mary's supervisor was actually a passenger sitting in front of me, and she was talking to her, about how she went to London. And so she had a couple minute conversation. So I was kind of eavesdropping and kind of just interested in her. And so when she continued on with her service, I was like, oh, hey, how's it going? Like, how was London? Like, that sounds really cool. Started talking to her, got her name. And when she told me her name was Mary, I kind of felt like it was God telling me right then and there that I was to marry her. And that like this sense of purpose in my life that I was lacking. Like I was making all this money and just, I was going to, not strip clubs. Well, actually I did go to a few strip clubs. I was going to like bars and just getting bottle service and just kind of wasting it. I was saving a good amount too, but I felt like I was trying to fill this hole that couldn't be filled. And Mary, really gave me a sense of purpose. And, so then now in the story of our daughter, like she had been told by many doctors that she wasn't able to conceive. And we proved that. And she had tried for years in the past with a previous relationship to have a child. And, here we are without having to go through any fertility treatments, just naturally we're blessed with a child. So, and then obviously, you could say, oh, that's just chance and reason, or that's just the outcome of the events. And I think there's too much to this world that I think here's a good way to put it. I think atheism is a religion too. And I think it takes just as much faith, if not more, to believe that we, these dumb human beings, can say that for certainty, we know our creation is not from God. Mm-hmm. I think it takes just as much faith to believe that than it does that God created this amazing universe.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're touching on so many, I think, good points there. One is that there is just so much that we don't know, do not understand. There are so many, there's so much beauty and intricacy to the universe that we do not understand, that we cannot explain. Now, the flip side of that as well, is God just sort of our default explanation? Because, I've always find it very fascinating to speak to people, regardless of what they present themselves as, to then dig in deep to what they actually believe, because you realize that there is no consistency, right? Like you can speak to an atheist and say, okay, so you don't believe in God. Do you believe in an absolute good and evil? Is there right and wrong? And they might say, yes, absolutely, there's right and wrong. Well, how? Like that's kind of an odd thing to say if you're an atheist, because as far as I'm concerned, because without a higher authority, then there is none. I think that, like, in a way, right? Like, what is the authority then on that? So it's as if they do believe in some kind of authority. Same thing with, like, if somebody who says that they're a theist, right? And you could say, okay, well, what is that God? Is it a you could go into a church where everybody says that they're the same faith, but then they're like, okay, well, what is that God? Is that an old man with a beard, standing in some clouds? Or is that, and then you'll see that there's like huge diversity in what they actually believe in. Like, well, what happens when you die? And again, there's just massive diversity in what people believe. And I find it all I find it more just intellectually interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm torn. I think, I forget the philosopher's name who said that, but basically it was just like, there's the one side of it, which is, like, what do you have to lose? Right? If you say that you're right, if you say that there is a God and you're wrong, well, so be it, right? If there is a God and you say that there isn't, well, like, boy, you gamble wrong. So what's the harm in doing that? I also think that you touched on something earlier in all of that, which is that, and this certainly seems to be the course of history. It's like without that base, without something to that kind of to pull us together to a faith, that we almost end up starting to feel lost, that our lives sort of lose a certain degree of meaning. And what I always find interesting looking back over the course of history is that when we kind of when we diverge a lot in a way as we are now, where we start to, we sort of abandon traditional religions, all of a sudden these various, like, it's almost as if like a gazillion different little like mini cults kind of pop up. Not necessarily cults, but like, there's all of these different kind of tangents that everybody goes on because they're trying to fill a void. And that's the part where I'm convinced that it just seems like there's a need, there is a spirit, regardless of how you define your spirituality, whether you call it a god or not a god, whatever it is, that there is a spiritual component to the human experience that is a little hard to deny. And certainly some people don't have it and don't experience it.
100%. And
the final thing that I would say that and I don't know if this is necessarily aligned with what you were saying, but I certainly, for sure, if I look on TV or whatever, and I see sort of the religious extremists, okay, fine. Then I can get a taste of that intolerance. But what I find very funny is that the majority of Jews or Catholics or Muslims that I come across are very tolerant of atheists. Whereas the atheists are the lesser tolerant. Like, it's just like, as soon as like you for somebody who's like a staunch atheist, you mention the idea of God, oh, you're a Bible thumping, whatever, and it's like, who's the, like, I'm going to side with the more tolerant, and you're not, like, there's something about, like, it's weird to me how the atheists I often come across are less tolerant of the theists than the theists are of the atheists, at least in my personal experience.
Interesting. I'd say there is that. Also, on the flip side, there's Christians that are not very tolerant of
absolutely
atheists, especially, and other religions too. And it's not the way that I approach it. Having been one myself, I can understand. I'd say if someone grew up Christian and then never really experimented deep within their minds about their religion and the creation of the universe. I mean, really, that's what drove me. Like, I was a huge astrophysics and space and cosmos guy. I have shirts that's just the cosmos. Like, that's like probably what my mind looks like. And if you have some psychedelic experience, like mushrooms were, a big one for me, like that I did to, do some experimentation. You really start to feel that spiritual connection with, like, we're a lot more connected than I think we are. And there is a lot more to life than what can be seen. And, so I like talking about it just like you, from just an interesting perspective without a motive to, like, try to convert someone or things like that. Because I don't really think that's effective. And
right.
Yeah, there's something else that you said.
I don't know, maybe
that I forgot.
I don't know. We come back. If it comes back to you, you can tell me. So we've definitely, this happens a lot on my show. I'm here to talk about marketing.
Talking about God.
We end up talking about all kinds of other, huge things. So tell me how have you incorporated this into the service that you're offering and the marketing? Because this is, I hear you talking about it. So it's obviously a big part of who you are.
Mm-hmm. So when I first started, so I, like my faith journey has been a long journey. So really kind of the defining moment, I'd say, was I started this challenge that I actually haven't finished yet, but I started the 90-day Bible reading challenge. And I read, I'm pretty much halfway. I'm at like day 47 or something. At that time, that was kind of like really when my LinkedIn, like I started going full in on LinkedIn, and I was traveling too much. So I didn't really have a consistent schedule to be able to commit to that. But from the, I mean, from the time that I started, just 30 days later, my life literally turned upside down 180 degrees. Like, you know, I went from like having no clarity of direction and feeling lost and torn between my work, my family, and my video passion, and to like actually doing this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I call it a coincidence, I don't know. Yeah, so
but in
you know,
doing that, are you saying that you start to get clients as a result?
You know, my first client, Intelligent Integration, they are a faith-based servant leadership organization. You don't necessarily need to be a Christian to work there, but their culture is, you know, serving a higher power, like, you know, not serving yourself. Oh, that's what it was. I think the natural tendency of, like I said, of humans is to serve oneself. And I think the idea that atheists latch onto is that like they know better and they ultimately want to be their own God. And that's where that anger and kind of, I feel like that's where that comes from, you know? Like, and that's the trap, right? I think if let's suppose there is a God, right? Mm-hmm. Would the natural tendency not want to be to like drive you away from that? Would the devil not want to tempt you with these thoughts? Would it not like naturally want to lead you down the wrong path? Like if it was just, does that make sense?
Well, it does make a lot of sense. And I think you're right that we are, look, I mean, all animals, all babies are born narcissists. They're born self-interested, like you were saying. But I mean, I think this is what, for me, I mean, this is what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, is that we discovered along the way a higher meaning and a higher purpose, and to serve each other or to serve God or whatever it is, but that we discovered a higher level of fulfillment when we aim for a higher objective beyond ourselves. There's also just a pure natural evolutionary explanation for being altruistic at the same time, right? I mean, we thrive better we are as social creatures, and certain other, you know, creatures certainly thrive in through community living versus, you know, that's like, you know, just on a basic level, like a herd mentality as well.
Right. Yeah. Tribe.
Right. You know, so, but I mean, I think for sure that, you know, like I said, to me, I mean, that's how, for example, I certainly am not somebody who would ever, and this always drives me nuts when somebody's like the atheist, like who try to force you to look at the Bible or Quran or whatever you believe in. For me, first of all, all three, you know, the First Testament, Second Testament, and the Quran are essentially the same book, right? And for who they try to force you down this path of taking everything literally, and I certainly would never do that. To me, the story of Adam and Eve, for example, it's metaphorical, and it's really, for me, a metaphor of some stage in our evolution where we all of a sudden started to evolve very rapidly, right? Like, you know, so for example, basically it's the story of, okay, we were animals, we had no shame, we were running around naked like every other animal, and then we obtained wisdom. And I find it kind of almost like a metaphor for evolution, because at some point, you know, as we evolved, our brains got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I find it very funny, for example, that, you know, once, you know, they eat the apples and then God gets mad at Adam and Eve, and then he's like, okay, you know, here's your punishment, right? So what does he say to, you know, so for women in part, there's a reference to that, like, you're going to suffer through childbirth and so forth. Well, that's kind of funny, right? The fact that we evolved, like that was the thing, right? As we evolved and as our brains got bigger and bigger, well, all of a sudden now babies had to be born basically premature compared to all other species, because our brains our heads got so big that, right, like we had to come out early, right? Which is why, you know, it's like childbirth for parents or for mothers is so painful, and why a baby, you know, can't, compared to all other animals, can't do squat, right? Like a little monkey, right, comes out and then he's pretty much like swinging from the trees within a day or two, right? He's like, you know, not us, right? Like we are helpless, we are useless, because effectively we're prematurely born. So there's something to the story that I find just a metaphor for, again, realizing a higher purpose, realizing a higher meaning. That's what that knowledge is. There's like there's the knowledge, but then with it comes a degree of suffering. And at least, I mean, that's a very loose and rough interpretation of that story, and I don't know why I'm necessarily going down that path, but
that's very interesting. That's one of the I mean, that's one of the things that you consider when you're like, you know, it's the whole thing. It's like, I can't be a Christian. Like, people are going to think I'm an idiot. I'm really smart. I can't be perceived as an idiot, you know? And you said something interesting like that. You said that's what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. So when you say that, like, that makes me feel like that we're not directly connected, like, through evolution. I don't know. It's like, at first when I started believing in God, I took that approach that, like, oh, you know, these are just kind of metaphors, or these are kind of symbols, and, you know, 6 days might have been 6 billion years. Like, who knows? I'm not God. I don't know. So, and also, like, this is man, like Moses, and like, this is man's writing of God. So it's secondhand to us, right? To him, it was firsthand. But yeah. So, like, okay. So this is quite an interesting question. Why would you say then, if evolution is a thing, like, why there are still monkeys? Like, I'm sure there's a million people that have answered this, but, like, what are your thoughts for that?
Well, I mean, I mean, this is the thing: is animals sort of branch off, right? Like, I mean, it's so as long as it is, like, evolution is basically accidents that occur that then give a survival advantage, right? So just because, you know, so why are there still,
they didn't all die?
Chance basically is that, you know, you have a whole bunch of chimps, and they're all having natural born chimps, and then one freak baby gets born, and this particular instance, that mutation allowed for him to survive, thrive a little better, and so that becomes its own branch. Doesn't mean that the old branch dies off necessarily. So that's why they are. When I say it's separate, what separates us is the fact that we are the rare species that can override our animal instincts. Our animal instincts are there, and in fact, I think we actually have a tendency to overstate our free will. There's so much going on. There's so many things in our subconscious, and so many interplays in our brains that we're so not even aware of. Like the fact that, you know, like smell, for example, like has and pheromones and all these things that that serve to help us detect a suitable partner, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this experiment where they gave people, they had men wear a bunch of shirts for a day or something like that, and then they had women smell them to say, you know, how would you predict how attractive that other person was? And basically what they found was, just through that smell, through that olfactory sense, there was a natural biological screener for people who were related to them, in other words, to avoid incest. And that operates on a level that we're not even aware of. So I think we overstate how much that we are still animals, and we still operate like we are still a bunch of chimps, really. I did see that that study. It also increases during ovulation. Yeah, the attractiveness. Well, yeah, the attractiveness, or their ability, that detection level. So, but we are the one species that can override it, right? Like, so my point simply being this is that, like, when I see, you know, if you see a cat playing cat and mouse, and then trapping the mouse, and then he kind of like, you know, swats it around, hurts it a bit, and then sits there and waits for him to move a bit, right? If that was a person, I would be like, you're a friggin' sadist. Why are you torturing this poor mouse? Whereas when it's a cat, I can't say, oh, you're an evil. I mean, maybe cats are evil. I don't know. But what do I know? But I mean, like, to me, it's just, okay, you're just an animal. It's just acting within its instinct. And that's the difference, right? Like, that's why that behavior is evil for a person and not necessarily evil for, we've removed ourselves to a certain level. We achieve, and again, that, you could say it could just be a matter of evolution, that we've achieved a certain level of consciousness, with which comes a degree of responsibility, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
So what would you say about social media and technology and how it affects our, you know, our mental health? And
I'm so glad that you asked me that. And I'll tell you why, because this is why in this show, I have allowed it to go in all kinds of directions and talk about society, even willing to talk about religion, drugs, whatever the case might be. It wasn't my mandate in the beginning. I'm so glad you asked that, because it wasn't my mandate. At the beginning, it was like, you know, hey, I just want to come out and give marketing and sales advice to people.
Yeah.
But a couple of things happened. One was that I would get guests on the show, and a lot of them wanted to talk about a whole bunch of other things. And what I realized is that it's all interrelated. See, like, social media has transformed this industry night and day. I was in this industry 20 years ago when it was print and radio and TV, right? And nothing has changed this industry as much as social media. But it hasn't just changed. So I mean, I've been forced to adapt to that. I have no choice, in a way, if this is what I do, to understand, wrap my head around social marketing. And there's a lot of great benefits to it, but it hasn't just transformed my industry. It has transformed the world. It has transformed society, in some ways for better, in some ways for worse. So to get back to your question about, you know, like, you know, what about social media, how does it impact us? On one hand, it's true that it allows us to connect. Mark, when I interviewed Mark Mentry, he made that good point. You know, if 1,000 years ago, a guy like he and I would never talk, right? He would be somewhere in Africa, I would be somewhere in Europe probably, and we would never talk to each other. It allows us to connect with people around the world. On the other side, I'm critical of it, of how it has actually isolated us. I am critical of certainly these early stages and these early platforms, these sort of inauthentic, superficial presentation of self. I think that I blame social media in part for the rise of depression. And the reason for that in part is because I think what it is, especially for young people, right? When everybody's always presenting this happy, smiley, look at me, here's my wonderful plate of lasagna, look at me in the Bahamas, and look at me in front of a Lamborghini, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody's lives are just presented as being always awesome. And so the individual, a young person looks at that, they look at everybody else's profile, and they see nothing but happy, smiley people living these rock star lives. And they say, well, that doesn't match my experience. That doesn't match my internal experience. The way that they appear to feel doesn't match how I feel inside. And so that almost compounds any sort of negativity, because they start to say, well, what's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Right? So I think that's a very sort of negative impact. And that's why, again, I like what I see on LinkedIn. I like the fact that people are all of a sudden getting a little more real, showing their vulnerabilities, being honest about things that they've suffered through, and asking for help and supporting each other.
Come here, Zozo. Come here, Zoe. Come here.
There we go.
My daughter woke up.
Yeah.
We got a guest on the show. Come here, Zozo.
Oh, okay.
What's wrong, baby? What's wrong? What's wrong?
Oh.
This is Zoe, everybody.
Hello, Zoe. Oh, you do look like you just woke up.
Yeah, it's like 6 a.m. here. I thought I'd be able to sneak this show in before.
Okay. Oh, wow.
But no, it's cool. You know, we're just getting into some interesting talk. Zoe, what do you think about social media? It's been around since your whole life. What do you think? She watches YouTube a lot, so
yeah, my kids do.
It's like it's a good and a bad thing, right? It's like, so she learns a lot of stuff from there, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, it's almost inescapable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that it drives me nuts is sort of how I find that it's reducing our attention spans, right? Like people are just like, you know, like, I mean, this immediacy that people are so used to, the fact that you can get, you know, on demand. Like when I was a kid, like there weren't that many TV channels. That it was a big deal when they had this like converter box, right? It was this cord that ran from the TV, and it had these buttons, and you could change the channels on. It had like 3 little sort of levels of dials that you could go up.
Wow.
You know, but if you wanted to watch a show, you had to sit in front of the TV and at the time that it aired and watch it. And you know, if you missed it, you missed it. Like that was that. When I was really small, I mean, we didn't even have VCRs or anything, right? Like there was nothing. So, I mean, it's amazing, but it reduces.
You don't look that old, man.
I'm 44, man.
Oh, you're still young, man. You're still young.
I can tell you, it's 44.
Cool. Yeah. So, gosh, there was you know, I've experienced it, man. You know, over the last 4 months and going deep into social media, it's such a paradox, and you know, it does leave you feeling kind of weird. But you know, I do talk about that. I talked about it a couple times. I don't want to talk about it too much because then I don't want to just be like negative and stuff. But you know, there were times where I'm like, I feel like the LinkedIn algorithm's out to get me. Like I feel like I'm shadow banned, or you know, I feel like LinkedIn maybe doesn't want to push a religious agenda, so my views are kind of just getting pushed. And then also I'm like, no, that's not the case. That's just me in my mind, and I just got to keep making videos. And so,
yeah, look, I mean,
I don't know, there's also this, there's kind of this feeling that you see, like when I first started, you know, before your first LinkedIn video, you have 0 views, right? And then you look at people like Goldie, people like Quentin, and like, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, no, fuck that. I could do that. You know, like there's nothing separating me from them. And so even still to this day, like I don't try to compare views and stuff like that. Like, I mean, people still seem to know who I am and stuff. And I connect with the right people, I feel like. So whether that's a 1,000 or 1,000,000, I think that part doesn't really matter. I'm living the life I want to live. So in that regard, I'm successful. So, well, I mean, what else is there?
Yeah, you know, there's 2 things that I want to pull out of that. One is exactly that. Like, I mean, what you have to start somewhere, right? Like exactly like you said. Yeah, of course, you're going to have 0 views, 0 audience, and you may not have the most experience to share with the world. And so be it. But in doing, you gain that experience, and in doing, you grow that audience. And as long as you're honest about it, like, I mean, this is where I would discourage younger people from the whole sort of fake it till you make it, like trying to this idea of like pretending as if you're a thought leader before you've really had any work experience, or pretending that you're, you know, that you know, you're, like I said, like renting a Lamborghini and being like, you know, and getting like, you know, like a couple of wads of cash and be like, look how I made $1 million in social media, and like, it's just so fake. Like people have very high, I'm gonna be nice because we got a child here, so BS detectors, you know, that I think they'll see through that. So I mean, if you're honest about, you know, here's where this is the stage that I'm at, and this is what I'm where I'm going through, like nobody, and you know, again, like nobody's gonna be, there's so much going on, there's so many avenues that one can take that nobody can be the master of all anyways. So I think it really is, we're all just sort of, you know, first of all, LinkedIn video hasn't been around for that long anyways. It was only June of last year that they launched it. So, you know, we're early
adopters.
we're early adopters, and we're all still figuring out, well, what works, what doesn't work. Like, you know, is anybody really a true guru expert? Like, no. Something that I did want to call in, because I've got no problem. Like I said, like, I mean, there's great ways to connect and grow a business through social media. There's a lot of benefits. I don't mean to detract from that, but I think it's important to be honest about the negatives. And you touched on one earlier when early in the show when we started talking about confirmation bias. That's where I have an issue. I mean, that's the problem. People need to be mindful of the fact that the algorithms are feeding you what you like and what you do, and based on your behaviors, and it's reinforcing that. And that's a major social problem as far as I'm concerned, that we are all living in these isolation tanks because like, you have to, I feel like, you know, it's something that I want to, like, you have to actively look for the alternate,
outside,
actively change up the things that you're searching for, so that the algorithms start giving you different opinions. Otherwise, you just get the sense that the whole world agrees with you, or that the whole world has one opinion, and they don't.
This is very scary, especially on Facebook. So for a while, I was doing Airbnb and short-term rentals, and I was part of a group. Literally, my whole feed was group posts and this and that. And I connected with, like, recently, maybe 3-4 months, a few months ago, connect with like one LinkedIn person. Next thing you know, everyone from LinkedIn is on my suggested friends. My LinkedIn has basically, or my Facebook has become like a second LinkedIn. It's kind of strange how, like, accurate the algorithm is at, like, predicting what's important to you. It's kind of, like I said, it's confirmation bias.
Well, yeah,
I'd say more so than LinkedIn. But
yeah, I mean, it's a mix of good and bad. And I think we just need to sort of spread awareness about what that is, and have people be aware of what it is. Like, is it a bad thing that Facebook is using my psychometric data to serve me ads and information that I want? Not entirely. Like, you know, I mean, because it's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of an advertiser's time to be advertising feminine hygiene products. Not that I have a problem with feminine hygiene, but it's just not something that I'm going to be spending my dollars on. So why?
That's a good point.
You know, so why? Like, why put that in front of me? It's like I said, it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of their ad spend. So do I have an issue with the fact that things that I might be interested in, that I'm likely to buy or purchase or show an interest in, is what gets fed to me? No, it's not a terrible thing. You know, as long as they're not, you know, I mean, the data that I want to protect is my visa number, my social insurance number, all those kinds of things. That's the stuff that I want protected. Do I really care that some machine in the background is feeding me, you know, because I'm all of a sudden get interested in, you know, working out, and now I'm looking for appropriate sports gear, and now some sports gear ads come on my way? What's wrong with that? I don't have a problem with that. It's more on the socio sort of political side of things, where, you know, it reinforces ideologies, and that's part of my mission in a way, is to sort of try to help depolarize our society at the moment. We're just too polarized. And that is my one big critique of social media at large, is that it reinforces that instead of bringing us together. And the point that I would resolve on that is this, is, you know, if you ask people, what does the better future look like? Then you'll realize that we are so much more aligned, right? How many people do you speak to that are like, well, hey, I'm pro-racism. I'm pro-poverty. I am pro, you know, inequality of income or whatever, right? Like, we all want a more tolerant, more, for the most part, unless you're just a jerk. Like, you know, we're all for
sociopath or something.
No, but I mean, yeah, but my point is being, it's just like the outcome, the end goal is actually quite consistent. If you think about it in those terms, then you realize that we are more aligned. Where we're divided is the path to it. And if you take that step back and you realize that people's intentions are in the right place, that they were just sort of divided on that path, and you recognize that historically this is the way things go, that progress has never been a straight line to that goal. It has always been serpentine. The pendulum has always swung, from one side to the other, because we tend to sort of, the extremes pull us from one side to the other. And somewhere down the middle, if you, in retrospect, you see what that path was, the balanced path that got us to the progress that we're at. And that's a great point that Mark Metry made when he was on my show, is that by every metric, the world is better today. There is less poverty, there is less tribalism, there is less violence, you know, and it's so again, to just be wary of what our news feeds and the mainstream media in particular, I would say, are feeding us. They are sensationalizing it, and they're showing you the bad and the ugly because it gets more ratings, and you know, so you know, there's my big diatribe.
I got that was good. I got a question.
Shoot.
If an alien shows up.
I like your questions. Go ahead.
And they show up and they see us. They see our humans and they see us talking right now. Where do you think they like have a hard time deciding what's like where the line is drawn between, you know, like we're in a form of augmented reality right now. Like we're in a form of virtual reality right now. It's like, where is that line drawn of like what's human and what's not? Like, are these extensions of us? You know, the singularity.
Who knows? I mean, it's really hard to say, you know. I mean, first of all, they might go to the dogs first because they're like, well, you know, we're the ones picking up their poop after them, so these guys are in charge. So once they go to the dogs, and maybe, who knows, maybe they can communicate better with the dogs than we can. I don't know, man. I mean, you know, it's an interesting question. I mean, what? And I don't know, when you say, like, I don't know that I'm necessarily bought into this idea that I'm not necessarily sold on the, like, that we are living in an augmented reality. I mean, that's a theory out there, that this is all a simulation.
That's not necessarily as much as that's a whole different discussion, but I'd say, like, just, you know, like there's the neural connections within our brain, and then you look at the internet, like, how is that not part of our brain? Like, soon we'll eventually be able to directly access that.
Yeah. No, well, and on that level, what I would say is this, and, you know, I forget the year, like 1960 something maybe, or whatever, like, so Carl Jung presented this idea of the zeitgeist, the universal consciousness, right? And what I feel is that, you know, like basically that, exactly, that we almost share this there's a shared mind, and he pulled out of the fact that, you know, it's very interesting if you look back through ancient history, different parts of the world would somehow develop almost the same stories, even though like different cultures might not have any interaction with each other. They ended up having the same story. So he kind of developed this idea of the universal consciousness. And what I feel is that the social media, the internet itself is basically an extension of that. We have basically created the next level of that universal. It facilitates it and it speeds it up. That old way of news traveling and interaction, social interaction, evolved over many, many years. And so it's sort of that's almost like a mature brain. Whereas the internet is the technology is new. And I think it also originally in its early days, and I'm hopeful that we are now moving past this. In its early days, it appealed to our most infantile tendencies. So in other words, you know, we were just our pure, and again, like we were saying, like how a baby is born naturally narcissistic. It just appealed to our narcissistic tendencies, and that, again, like we just behaved like babies for a little while. But it's also, at the same time, it's what it facilitates is the speed at which that universal consciousness is able to kind of communicate. We are, exactly like you're saying, we are basically, each individual is almost like a neural node within the brain, and we are constantly basically having conversations with ourselves within our brains, right? I mean, that's how you have a thought, right? You basically represent when you're debating, gee, should I be doing this? What's right? What's wrong in this? You basically create two like people in your brain, right? One that takes one argument, one that takes the other, and then you have a fight with yourself and battle it out. Well, I mean, that's what the, so it's that universal consciousness, each individual sort of representing its node, each with their strengths, their insights, their experiences, having that conversation on a faster level because of just what we built. So yes, I believe that the internet is an extension of ourselves. It's an extension of our minds. We are integrating ourselves with it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers.
That does. I have a question.
Go ahead.
What would you say the percentage odds are that you yourself, you are just in your own world and everything else outside of you is a figment of your imagination, and the world was like that's how you are in this this existence, and
well, okay.
That's what your mind created.
Yeah, that this is me, myself, and I, and that well, I mean, yeah, look, I mean, you can't go like that's
it's not zero.
We're talking about Descartesian logic, right? That question basically is from where René Descartes came up with the "I think, therefore I am." Right? I thought
that was cogito.
No. That's René Descartes. I'm pretty sure. That's
okay. I've heard it as the cogito argument. I think, therefore I am.
Well, yeah. Cognito. Yeah. What the Latin of it is cognito ergo sum.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Right. So
René Descartes, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So René Descartes is the guy who said, cognito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. And yeah, when he basically is sort of like, what can I say for sure? And so the only thing that one can say for sure is well, like, I know I exist. I don't know for sure that you do. What do I think is the likelihood of that? Probably pretty slim.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think now, I mean, this is where, and I'm still kind of working this out of my head, but I believe that truth is paradoxical. In other words, we've for many years, we've kind of just said, well, like there's only one truth and there's only one reality. And if X is true and X says that Y is false, then Y cannot be true. That, like any kind of like there's all kinds of paradoxes. If you look up online, you'll find all kinds of like paradoxes, right?
Say that again. That was an actual paradox. You're just
No, that wasn't an actual. I'm just saying, like, I'm just formulating like a generic paradox of like, if X states that Y is false and X is true, therefore Y is false. Well, but what I think is that in reality, and I think we are starting to kind of realize this potential with this as we get into quantum physics, right? We've been living in a Newtonian reality for years where those were the rules of physics. And what's very interesting is that those rules break apart once you get to the atomic level. All of a sudden, those rules are completely shifted around. And the great, fascinating experiment in quantum physics was this experiment that they did where they fired, have you ever seen that one where they fire a photon through a little hole? And the prediction would be that, okay, if you fire it straight through the hole, it's always going to splatter in one area. And when you observe it, then that's exactly what it does. And when they stopped observing it kind of spread out all of a sudden. They couldn't, like, how is that
probability?
Yeah, what is that? Like, all of a sudden, the infinite possibilities can happen. So this is why, I haven't wrapped my head around this fully. But somewhere in there, what I'm saying is, well, maybe all of those things where we say, like, is there one truth? No. Maybe truth is paradoxical. Maybe I think it is to answer your. This is an answer to your question. It's both.
It ties back. Yeah.
It's both, right?
So,
in other words, like
so,
yes, so yes, you are the only person the universe is contained within you, and the universe is outside of you. And as contradictory as those sound, I think both can be true. A beautiful, like, was, what was that movie with Will Smith?
Pursuit of Happiness.
No, not Pursuit of Happiness. It was like with the space, like the aliens, and they had like basically these guys were like.
Oh, iRobot.
No. It was the one where they had like these little universes. Like, so these guys were like like holding on to universes in like little marbles in their drawers, right? It's like the universe was within the universe.
So what really made it interesting to me, and you have the quantum decision, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, you are really free. You have free will to move around within this existence, within this universe. And so from that perspective, the universe is for you, and you can make a change on it. And yeah, so from that perspective, there may be other parallel universes that forked, or multiverses that, maybe I didn't quit my job and I didn't become a LinkedIn creator, but that's not a universe for me. This is the universe I decided to fork into. I don't know. So
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Like, and I don't know, like, I mean, nor do I think physicists have fully figured this out. Like, I mean, this is all just, very new stuff. Like, I mean, and who knows what we'll learn from these hadron collectors as, the years go on. But I think the one sort of practical thing that I would take of it is that there is really this sort of recognition, I guess, within quantum physics, that time is a bit of an illusion for us, right? It's actually kind of elastic, and in reality, almost everything happens, according to physicists. Again, I'm no expert on this, but basically that everything really actually happens in an instant. And it's kind of true, right? That in the sense that when the past isn't when you look at the past, you think about the past. It's not like a real thing. It's not an actual place, but you're able to go there with your mind. And in the same way, in the future, you are sort of, just a memory. And the same thing is that when you start to think about the future, well, then that is
an idea.
It's an idea, or it is a memory of your future, an envisioned future and stuff like that. So I think there is an interesting sort of mental exercise in that if you that you experience them as real, right? Like, in the sense that if you can, it doesn't matter, like, whether it's, on one hand, it's the only real moment is the present. But if you start to think about something that happened in the past, you can relive it as if it is emotionally in every way, like, tangible and real to you, as if it was just happening. And same thing about in the future. If you envision something in the future, then it is equally sort of real. And I think that, you can then kind of use that to your advantage of saying, well, okay, well, what is the reality that I want to manifest in my life today, in the moment now? What is that future, right? And catch yourself, when you, like, how many times, I don't know if you've ever had this, where you've been like anticipating like some conversation, especially if you like, you work for somebody or a boss or something that you anticipate is going to be like this awful, like, oh, it's going to be, they're going to get so mad at me, they're going to be terrible. This is going to be awful. And then it ends up being not nearly as bad as you anticipated. And you put yourself through hell. You envision this conversation that was highly contentious, highly emotionally fraught, all this disappointment that you expected from the conversation. And then you talk to the person, they're like, oh no, I understand what you're saying. Okay. And it was like, oh, okay, that wasn't nearly as bad. And so if you catch yourself doing that and start to envision better outcomes, I think they will manifest.
100%. And yeah, once you kind of realize that, like I really started realizing it like this year. And I mean, I don't know, like, yeah, I mean, I always just kind of like did my own thing and did what I want, but like really thinking about like, hey, like literally I can actually reach beyond what I think is possible and then actually make it possible. And, you know, I used to do a thought, we'll end on this thought experiment I used to do when I was a kid, and probably we could still do it now. It's like, you just try to imagine, and it takes a few seconds to kind of sink in, but it's like you try to imagine a non-existent universe, just black emptiness, nothingness. And I definitely think this beats that for sure. Even with all the suffering and stuff, I definitely think this beats that.
Here's a question for you. Do you think we are even capable of conceptualizing nothingness?
When I would do that thought experiment, like it would kind of sink in. It would bring me to a weird place, and so I don't think we really know what that would. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, I
don't think you can. I don't think you're not fully there. First of all, because you're like, when you say, just like, think about the language that you just said there, like, it brought me to a weird place. Well, a place is something. It's not nothingness. Yeah. I don't think you can actually do it. And if you could, how would you get yourself back? You would be in nothingness. From where would you come back from? You cannot do it. Is what is I believe. I don't think you can actually. You can kind of do it. You can certainly conceptualize the absence of something. You can, you know, I can put a dollar in my hand and say, can you envision the absence of this dollar? And oh wow, you know, and you know, if I was a magician, you know, like that would be easy. You know, but of pure actual nothingness, I don't think we can conceive of it.
Do you think it exists?
What's it? There is no it to exist.
Yeah.
Like, no. There's some. I mean, do I think there's? No, I don't. I mean, no, I don't think there's something. There's always, like, even in an absence, even in a vacuum, there is a vacuum. So no, I cannot. I'm not capable of it. And anybody who says that they can, it's like, well, okay, go there. How did you come back?
That's I've never heard that response, but I haven't really talked to that many like people that deeply about it. Dude, this has been an awesome conversation, man.
It's been a lot of fun.
You're a cool dude, man.